The sacred crystals glowed with dying light as High Priestess placed her six-fingered hands upon the altar. Around her, the last survivors of 17 worlds knelt in the great temple, their blue skin pale with fear and exhaustion. Through the massive windows, they could see the dark shapes moving between the stars. The swarm had found them again. Closed her large, silver eyes and began the ancient words. Her voice echoed through the temple as she spoke in the old language, the one their ancestors used when the galaxy was young. The other joined her, their voices rising and falling like ocean waves. They had done this ritual on every world before it fell. They had prayed on as the bioships descended. They had begged the gods on new sanctuary as the swarm consumed their children. They had called out on havens, rest as their cities melted under alien hunger. But this time was different. This was their home world, the last place left to run. There would be no evacuation ships this time, no desperate flight to another star. They had herded them here like animals, destroying every colony and outpost until only Prime remained. The swarm moved slowly, feeding on the dead worlds behind them, growing stronger with each meal. The crystals on the altar began to crack. These were the last ones, the final pieces of their most sacred artifacts. For 1,000 generations, they had believed these crystals could reach across space to call the eternal guardians. The legends spoke of beings of pure light who had protected the galaxy long ago, before they had even learned to look at the stars. Great guardians who dwell beyond the veil of space, spoke, her voice growing stronger. We call to you in our darkest hour. The devourers have come and we cannot fight them. Our weapons do nothing. Our shields fail. Our people die screaming as their bodies are dissolved and consumed. The temple shook as something massive moved outside. Through the windows, they could see a bioship sliding through the upper atmosphere. It looked like a living thing, all curves and organic growth. Its surface pulsed with veins that glowed sickly green. Acid dripped from its underside, burning the air itself. The younger whimpered, but did not stop. She pressed her hands harder against the crystals, feeling their power flowing into the ancient transmitter beneath the altar. The device had been built by their ancestors, designed to send messages across impossible distances using technology they barely understood anymore. We have tried to live in peace, she continued. We have harmed no one. We seek only to exist, to raise our young, to sing the old songs under our 3 moons. But the swarm cares nothing for peace. They see only food. They turn our people into nutrients for their endless hunger. The crystals began to sing, a high, clear note that made the air itself vibrate. The sound was beautiful and terrible, like the last song of a dying star. Every in the temple felt it in their bones, in their blood, in their souls. This was their final prayer, sent out into the darkness with the last of their sacred power. Outside, more bioships arrived. They moved like fish through water, their bodies twisting and flowing as they descended toward the surface. The military had tried to fight them at the outer moons. Their brave pilots had flown into battle with fusion lances and particle beams, but the weapons had barely scratched the bioship's living armor. Instead, the swarm had learned from each attack, adapting and growing stronger. Please, whispered, and now her voice carried across the subspace frequencies, riding the crystal's power out into the void. If you exist, if you have ever cared for the weak and innocent, help us now. We do not ask for conquest or glory. We ask only to survive, to see one more sunrise on our world, to hold our children safe from the darkness that comes to devour us all. The youngest priestess, barely past her naming ceremony, began to cry. Her tears were silver, like all tears, and they caught the dying light of the crystals. Wanted to comfort her, but she could not break the ritual now. Too much depended on this moment. The message went out, carrying with it all their hopes and fears. It contained not just words, but images and sounds. The beauty of Prime at dawn, when the 3 moons still hung in the purple sky. The laughter of their children playing in the crystal gardens. The songs they sang to welcome the seasons. And the horror of what the swarm had done to their other worlds. Far above, the bioships began to move into attack formation. Their living weapons emerged from hidden pouches in their hulls. Acid throwers that could melt through any armor. Spore pods that would burst in the atmosphere and rain death on everything below. Molecular disassemblers that turned matter into raw material for the swarm's endless growth. Felt the crystals growing hot under her hands. Cracks spread across their surface like spider webs. Soon they would shatter completely, and with them would die the last hope of calling for help. But she held on, pouring all her faith and desperation into the ancient machine. "We are she said, and her words traveled through space at impossible speeds. "We are dying. If any compassionate beings hear this message, please remember us. Remember that we tried to live with honor. Remember that we loved our world and each other. And if you can save us, if you have the power we lack, please come. Please help us fight the darkness." The crystals exploded into powder, their power spent. The temple fell silent except for the sound of quiet weeping. Above them, the bioships moved closer, their weapons charging with sickly light. But far out in space, something had heard their call. Something was already moving, changing course from its patrol route to investigate the source of the desperate message. Ships with metal hulls and fusion hearts, crewed by beings who had never heard of the eternal guardians, but understood perfectly the language of a last desperate stand. The prayer had been answered, but not by the gods they expected. Captain Sarah was drinking coffee from a magnetic mug when the communication system started screaming. The bridge of the UES Retribution fell silent as the alert klaxons cut through the normal hum of the ship's systems. Set down her mug and watched as Lieutenant bent over his console, his dark face lit by the glow of alien symbols. "What you got?" asked, walking over to look at the display. The Retribution was humanity's heavy cruiser, part of the first deep space patrol fleet sent beyond the edge of human territory. They were supposed to be mapping unknown star systems, not dealing with emergency signals. "Unknown transmission, Captain. It's coming from the 442 system about 6 light years from here. The signal is, well, it's not like anything we've seen before." His fingers danced over his controls, trying to clean up the transmission. "The computer is calling it a religious broadcast, but there's tactical data embedded in it somehow." Frowned. Humanity had been alone in space for 200 years since they figured out faster-than-light travel. They had found dead worlds, ancient ruins, and lots of empty space, but no living aliens. The possibility that they might not be alone had always excited scientists and scared military planners in equal measure. "Put it on speakers," ordered. The bridge filled with sounds that made everyone's skin crawl. It was like music, but wrong somehow. The voices rose and fell in patterns that hurt to listen to. The computer's translation system worked frantically, turning the alien words into rough English. Words about dying worlds, about creatures that consumed everything, about desperate prayers to beings of light. "Jesus," whispered Ensign Park from the navigation station. "They're being wiped out." Studied the tactical data that scrolled across the main screen. The computer had pulled coordinates, fleet positions, and casualty reports from the alien transmission. 17 worlds destroyed, billions dead, an enemy that seemed unstoppable, moving from system to system like a plague. "Commander Williams," called to her second-in-command, "get me a connection to the Devastator and the Furious. We need to talk." Within minutes, the holographic images of Captain James and Captain Lisa appeared on the bridge. Commanded the heavy cruiser UES Devastator, while led the experimental battleship UES Furious. Together, the 3 ships made up Patrol Group 7, humanity's first serious attempt at exploring beyond their borders. "I assume you both intercepted that transmission," began. Nodded grimly. He was an older man with gray hair and scars from the Titan War. "My linguistics team is still working on it, but the meaning is clear enough. Someone's in deep trouble." Leaned forward in her hologram. She was young for a captain, but she had earned her command by being the best tactician in the fleet. The signal came from a system 6 light-years away. If we push our engines hard, we could be there in 18 hours. Our orders are to continue mapping the outer regions, pointed out. Admiral Harrison was very clear about not getting involved in local conflicts. Looked at the alien transmission data again. The numbers were horrifying. Entire worlds stripped of life, populations in the billions reduced to zero in a matter of days. Whatever was attacking these aliens was efficient and merciless. These things, whatever they are, they're not staying in one system, said. Look at the pattern. They're moving outward, consuming everything in their path. If we ignore this, we might be dealing with them on our doorstep in a few years. Or we might be flying into a trap, warned. We don't know anything about these aliens. For all we know, they started this war themselves. Pulled up a star chart on her display. Actually, Captain, that's not what the data suggests. The transmission includes scan records of the attacking ships. They're biological, not technological. And the attack patterns show systematic extermination, not warfare. This looks like pest control, not politics. Made her decision. As the senior captain, she had the authority to change their patrol route in case of emergency, and this certainly qualified as an emergency. We're going, she announced. Full military speed to the 442 system. Prep all weapons systems and put the crew on combat alert. Shook his head but didn't argue. I hope you know what you're doing, Sarah. So do I, admitted. The 3 human ships changed course, their fusion engines burning bright in the darkness. The UES Retribution and UES Devastator were both heavy cruisers, designed for long-range patrol and heavy combat. Each ship carried nuclear missiles, rail guns, and experimental plasma weapons. The UES Furious was something different entirely, an experimental design that pushed human technology to its limits. Her weapons could crack planets if necessary. As they traveled through hyperspace, studied everything they knew about the alien transmission. The beings called themselves, and they seemed to be peaceful by nature. Their message spoke of prayer and faith, of calling out to mythical protectors called the Eternal Guardians. They clearly expected divine intervention, beings of light and energy who would save them with gentle wisdom. Almost felt sorry for them. They were about to get humanity instead. Dr. Elizabeth Hart, the Retributions, worked frantically to understand the enemy they were about to face. The scan data and the alien transmission showed creatures that easy classification. They were part biological organism, part living machine, perfectly designed for consumption and growth. They're like locusts, Hart explained to in the ship's briefing room. But worse, locusts at least leave the ground intact. These things break down matter at the molecular level and incorporate it into themselves. They don't just eat the aliens, Captain. They eat the planets. Can we fight them? Asked. Hart looked uncertain. The alien weapons seemed to be energy-based, designed for precise targeting and minimal collateral damage. Very civilized. These bioships seem to have adapted to that kind of attack. Good thing we're not civilized then, said grimly. As the human fleet approached the 442 system, long-range sensors began picking up massive energy signatures. The battle was still going on. Ordered all ships to battle stations as they prepared to drop out of hyperspace right into a war zone. The last thing the peaceful expected was for their prayers to be answered by 3 ships full of aggressive primates with nuclear weapons and a talent for extreme violence. But sometimes the universe has a sense of irony. Looked at her crew as they prepared to engage an unknown enemy to save an alien species they had never met. Every face showed the same mix of fear and excitement that she felt. This was why humanity had built these ships, trained these crews, and sent them into the darkness. Not to explore or discover, but to fight when fighting was necessary. All ships, this is Captain, she broadcast to the small fleet. We don't know what we're flying into, but we know why we're here. Somewhere in that system, innocent people are dying. Our job is to make sure the right people die instead. The human ships dropped out of hyperspace and into hell. The three human ships emerged from hyperspace like angry metal gods, their hulls glowing with heat from the violent transition back to normal space. Captain stared at the tactical display and felt her blood turn cold. The system was a nightmare. Prime hung in space like a wounded animal, its beautiful blue surface by burning cities. Dozens of bioships moved through the upper atmosphere, their organic hulls pulsing with sickly light as they sprayed acid and spores onto the surface below. In the distance, could see the remains of other worlds in the system, nothing left but asteroids and glowing debris. "My God," whispered Lieutenant, "how many of them are there?" Counted the contacts on her screen. 67 bioships, ranging from small fighters the size of shuttles to massive capital ships that looked like flying mountains. Each one was alive, breathing, growing. She could see them repairing damage in real time, their organic hulls flowing like liquid to seal wounds. "Captain," called out Commander Williams from the weapons station. "The bioships have detected us. They're moving to intercept." On the main screen, watched as a dozen of the alien vessels turned away from the planet and began accelerating toward the human fleet. They moved unlike any ship she had ever seen, flowing through space like sea creatures swimming through water. Their weapons were already emerging from hidden chambers in their hulls. In the great temple on Prime, High Priestess felt her heart stop beating as the sensor readings reached her screens. The temple's ancient instruments could barely comprehend what they were detecting. These new ships gave off energy signatures that burned like tiny stars. Their hulls were made of crude metal and ceramic, spewing radiation and heat into space with no regard for efficiency or elegance. "Priestess," called out one of her assistants, his voice shaking with confusion. "The new ships, they're not what the prophecies described. There is no light, no divine energy. They burn with the fire of destruction itself." Stared at the readings. The legends spoke of the eternal guardians as beings of pure energy, creatures of light who would descend from the heavens to save the righteous. But these ships were clearly built by beings of matter, crude and violent and alive with dangerous purpose. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "we called to the wrong gods." Captain opened communications on all frequencies, hoping the aliens could understand her words. "Unknown ships attacking Prime. This is Captain Sarah of the United Earth Ship Retribution. You will cease your attack and withdraw immediately, or we will open fire." The bioships responded by launching a barrage of living missiles. Watched in disgust as the projectiles moved through space, their surfaces writhing and pulsing. Each one was a living creature, bred for the sole purpose of destruction. "So much for diplomacy," muttered. "All ships weapons free. Let's show these things what real predators look like." The UES Retribution opened fire first, its main rail gun hurling a tungsten projectile at a significant fraction of light speed. The bioship it struck simply exploded, its organic armor no match for the kinetic energy of the impact. Green fluid and chunks of alien flesh scattered into space. "Direct hit," shouted Williams, "target destroyed," but was already watching the next salvo. The UES Devastator launched a spread of nuclear missiles, while the UES Furious charged its experimental plasma cannon. The missiles struck 3 bioships almost simultaneously, each warhead detonating with the fury of a small sun. The plasma cannon followed up, sending a stream of superheated matter that cut through 2 more aliens like a sword through paper. In the temple, watched in horror and amazement as the strange ships tore through the biofleet with ruthless efficiency. The had seemed unstoppable, their organic armor adapting to every weapon they possessed. But these newcomers fought with such brutal directness that adaptation was impossible. "They use atomic fire," whispered another priestess, staring at the tactical display. "They split the very atoms to create destruction, and those metal projectiles, they simply smash through everything in their path." The bioships tried to adapt, flowing and changing their shapes to better deflect the human weapons. But human tactics adapted faster. Captain coordinated the three ships like a single weapon, using their superior speed and firepower to stay out of range while systematically destroying the alien fleet. They began using new tactics, launching clouds of spores that could eat through metal and releasing acid sprays that could dissolve armor. But the human ships were designed for war in the most hostile environment imaginable. Their hulls were layered with radiation shielding, heat-resistant ceramics, and emergency repair systems. The alien biological weapons simply couldn't penetrate their defenses fast enough. Watched as a massive bioship, easily 3 times the size of her cruiser, tried to ram the Retribution. She ordered evasive maneuvers while Williams targeted the creature's brain cluster with their secondary weapons. Rail-gun slugs punched through the alien's neural tissue, and the massive ship went limp, drifting helplessly as its body died around its crew. "Captain," called out, "I'm detecting more bioships approaching from the outer system. Looks like reinforcements." Smiled grimly. "Good, I was worried we wouldn't have enough targets." The battle continued for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. They had evolved to fight civilized species that valued precision and efficiency over raw destructive power. They had never encountered anything like humanity, a species that had learned warfare in an environment so hostile that violence was simply another tool for survival. Where they used elegant energy weapons that targeted specific systems, humans used nuclear warheads that simply vaporized everything in their blast radius. Where the aliens employed careful tactical maneuvers, humans coordinated like a pack of wolves, using speed and aggression to overwhelm their prey. By the time the sun set on Prime, the space around the planet was filled with debris from destroyed bioships. The few surviving vessels were fleeing toward the outer system, their organic hulls and bleeding from wounds that would never heal properly. Stood at the temple's main viewing window, staring up at the strange ships that had saved her world. They hung in orbit like metal gods, their weapons still glowing hot from battle. She could see damage on their hulls from the fighting, but they had won decisively against an enemy that had destroyed 17 worlds. "They fight like demons," said the young priestess beside her, her voice filled with fear and wonder. "Yes," agreed, "but they are our demons now." Captain opened a communication channel to the planet below. Her translation software had been working on the alien language during the battle, and now she could speak directly to the survivors. "People," she said, her words transmitted to every receiver on the planet. "This is Captain. The immediate threat has been neutralized, but there are more of these creatures out there. We're going to need to discuss what comes next." Down in the temple activated her own transmitter. "Unknown saviors," she replied, "we thank you for your intervention, but we must ask, who are you? The prophecies spoke of beings of light, but you fight with fire and metal." Looked out at the wounded planet below. "We're humans," she said simply, "and we don't know anything about your prophecies. We just heard someone calling for help." The admission sent a chill through the temple. These beings had not come because of ancient promises or divine mandate. They had come because they heard strangers in trouble and decided to help. In some ways, that was even more terrifying than facing gods. High Priestess had not slept in 3 days. She sat in her private chamber deep within the temple, studying the data her sensors had collected during the battle. The more she learned about these humans, the more disturbed she became. The recordings showed everything. How the human ships had moved during combat, coordinating their attacks with machine precision. How their weapons had torn through bioship armor that had seemed indestructible. How their crews had reacted to the violence, not with the horror and disgust that any civilized being would feel, but with something that could only be described as satisfaction. A soft chime announced a visitor. Looked up to see Scholar and the eldest of their surviving academics. His usually perfect robes were stained with ash from the burning cities, and his large eyes were filled with questions she was not sure she wanted to answer. "Priestess," he said, bowing formally, "I have completed my analysis of the human transmissions. The results are troubling." Gestured for him to sit. "Tell me," and activated a small holographic projector, filling the air between them with images and data. Their language patterns suggest a species that has evolved in a state of constant conflict. They have over 300 different words for types of combat, but only a dozen for concepts of peace. Their ship designs are entirely focused on warfare, with minimal consideration for comfort or aesthetics. The hologram showed technical diagrams of the human vessels, could see the brutal efficiency in every line. Where ships were graceful curves designed to work in harmony with natural forces, human ships were angular weapons built to impose their will through violence. "But that is not the most concerning discovery," and continued. "I have been monitoring their communications since the battle. Priestess, they are not planning to leave." Felt her blood grow cold. "What do you mean?" "They are calling for reinforcements. More ships, more weapons. They speak of tracking them to their source and eliminating them completely." The word eliminating carried dark implications in the language. It was a concept their peaceful culture barely understood. The complete destruction of an entire species, not for resources or territory, but simply to ensure they could never harm anyone again. "They cannot mean genocide," said, though her voice lacked conviction. Anne's expression was grim. "I believe that is exactly what they mean, and more troubling still, their crews seem excited by the prospect." In orbit above, Captain stood in the Retribution's war room, studying a holographic map of the local sector. Red icons marked controlled systems, creating a disturbing pattern that stretched across dozens of star systems. Intelligence gathered from captured bioship fragments painted a picture of an enemy that had been spreading unchecked for decades. "The good news," reported Dr. Hart, "is that we can hurt them. Their biological armor is tough, but it can't adapt to kinetic weapons fast enough to matter. Nuclear warheads are even more effective because the radiation damages their cellular structure faster than they can repair it." Commander Williams nodded. "The bad news is that there are a lot more of them than we initially thought. Our deep scans suggest at least 12 major hive clusters, each one controlling multiple star systems." Studied the map. Each red icon represented billions of lives consumed, entire civilizations reduced to raw material for the swarm's growth. The scale of the horror was almost incomprehensible. "What's the Admiralty's response to our situation report?" she asked. "Admiral Harrison is sending the 2nd and 5th Fleets," Williams replied. 200 ships including the new dreadnoughts, full war load, authorized for unrestricted warfare. Dr. Hart looked uncomfortable. "Captain, unrestricted warfare against a biological species means—" "It means we do whatever it takes to make sure they never threaten anyone again," finished. "I know what it means, Doctor." The concept didn't seem to trouble the way it did the ship's scientists. She had grown up on a colony world where the native predators could kill a human in dozens of different ways. She had served in the Titan War, where survival meant being more ruthless than the enemy. The idea of showing mercy to something that consumed entire civilizations was not just foolish, it was immoral. Down on the planet's surface, received permission to visit the human ships. She needed to understand these beings who had answered their prayers with such devastating force. The shuttle ride up to the Retribution was her first time in space, and she spent the journey staring out at the debris field that had once been the fleet. The human ship was exactly what she had expected, and nothing like what she had hoped. Every surface was functional, every corridor designed for rapid movement during combat. The humans she passed looked at her with curiosity rather than reverence, their eyes holding an alertness that spoke of predators always ready for the next threat. Captain met her in what the humans called the observation deck. It was a rare concession to aesthetics on a ship otherwise devoted to warfare, a room with large windows that looked out at the stars. Was younger than had expected, with short dark hair and scars on her hands that spoke of a life spent in dangerous places. High Priestess said, offering what humans apparently considered a greeting. "Thank you for coming. We need to talk about what happens next." Studied the human carefully. "You speak of the future as if it is certain, but they are not defeated. They will return with greater numbers." "Yes, they will," agreed. "That's why we're going to follow them home and finish this." The casual way she spoke of species-wide extinction made skin crawl. "You would destroy them all, every last one." His expression hardened. "High Priestess, in the last 50 years, they have consumed over 30 intelligent species that we know of. Billions of sentient beings converted into raw biomass for their expansion. They don't take prisoners, they don't negotiate, and they don't stop. They are a cancer, and the only cure for cancer is complete removal." "But surely there must be another way," protested. "Some form of communication, some way to convince them to stop their attacks." Walked to the window and stared out at the wounded planet below. "When I was 10 years old, my colony was attacked by a species we called the creepers. They were intelligent, possibly more intelligent than humans. They had art, music, complex social structures. They also thought human children were a delicacy." Felt sick but continued without emotion. "We tried communication first. We offered them trade, territory, anything they wanted if they would just stop eating our kids. You know what they said? They said human fear improved the flavor, so they would keep hunting us because it made the meat taste better." The human captain turned back too, and her eyes held no mercy at all. "We killed them all, every last one. And you know what? The galaxy became a better place. Sometimes, High Priestess, the universe produces something so evil that the only moral response is complete eradication." Stared at this being who spoke of genocide as a moral necessity. "Your people, what kind of creatures are you?" Smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We're the kind of creatures that other predators have nightmares about. We're the monsters that monsters fear, and right now, that's exactly what the galaxy needs." As if to emphasize her words, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The reinforcements had arrived, and they had brought friends. Dozens of new bioships dropped out of hyperspace, their hulls bristling with weapons and their holds full of death. Smile widened. "Right on schedule. High Priestess, you might want to find somewhere safe to watch this. You're about to see what happens when humanity decides something needs to die." Admiral Way stared at the swirling red nebula that filled the main of the UES Apocalypse. The massive dreadnought hung in space like a metal cathedral, its hull bristling with weapons that could crack moons. Around it, 200 human warships waited in perfect formation, their crews ready for the final battle of a war that had lasted only 3 months but felt like a lifetime. "Final scan results are in," reported Captain from the bridge of his flagship. "We're looking at the primary breeding facility. Estimated bioship count is over 800 vessels, plus the spawning platforms that have been producing them for the last century." High Priestess stood on the observation deck of the Retribution, watching the human fleet prepare for what they called pest control. She had insisted on witnessing this final battle, though she was no longer sure why. Perhaps she needed to see how this story ended, to understand fully what her people's prayers had brought into the galaxy. The humans had spent the last months tracking the across space, following the trail of consumed worlds back to its source. Each battle had been more brutal than the last, with the humans showing no mercy and accepting no surrender. They had developed new weapons specifically for fighting biological enemies, virus bombs that infected bioships with synthetic diseases, radiation missiles that poisoned their organic systems, and fusion torpedoes that simply vaporized everything in their path. "High Priestess," said Admiral's voice over the communicator, "this is your last chance to reconsider. What we're about to do cannot be undone." closed her silver eyes and thought of the children who had died on 17 worlds. She thought of the cities that had been dissolved, the art and music and poetry that had been consumed and turned into biomass for an endless hunger. She thought of her own people, who would have been extinct if not for the arrival of these metal demons. "Do what you must," she said quietly. Admiral nodded grimly. He had hoped the alien priestess would ask them to stop, to find another way. It would have made what came next easier to live with, but she was right, of course. This was the only way to ensure they would never consume another world. "All ships," broadcast to the fleet, "this is Admiral. Today we end a cycle of death that has lasted for centuries. They have consumed over 50 intelligent species. They have turned entire star systems into feeding grounds. They know only hunger, and they will never stop unless we stop them." The Admiral paused, looking out at the nebula where countless bioships moved like schools of predatory fish. "What we do today will be remembered as either the greatest act of mercy or the greatest act of evil in galactic history. Perhaps both, but it will be remembered as necessary. All ships, weapons free. Let's finish this." The human fleet opened fire as one, 200 ships unleashing hell itself into the swirling clouds of the nebula. Nuclear warheads detonated like newborn stars, their fusion fire reaching temperatures that no biological organism could survive. Particle beams cut through the gas clouds, seeking out bioships and spawning platforms with deadly precision. They responded desperately, launching everything they had at the human fleet. Massive bioships the size of asteroids emerged from the depths of the nebula, their hulls thick with centuries of growth. Weapon organisms fired streams of acid and clouds of destructive spores, while fighter craft swarmed toward the human ships like antibodies attacking an infection. But the humans had learned from every previous battle. Their ships moved in coordinated formations, using overlapping fields of fire to protect each other while systematically destroying everything in their path. When bioships tried to ram them, the humans simply moved aside and targeted their engines. When spore clouds threatened their hulls, point defense systems burned them out of space with laser fire. Watched in horrified fascination as the battle raged. The humans fought with a precision that was almost artistic, each ship knowing exactly where to be and when to fire. But beneath that precision was something savage and primal, a joy in destruction that her peaceful people could barely comprehend. "Spawning Platform Alpha destroyed," reported one of the ship's officers. "Spawning Platform Beta is breaking up. Platform Gamma is... Jesus, it's launching something." On the main screen, they could see a bioship unlike any they had encountered before. It was massive, easily the size of a small moon, and its surface crawled with weapons and defensive systems. This was clearly the Queenship, the central intelligence that coordinated the entire swarm. "All ships focus fire on that target," ordered Admiral. "Everything we have." The human fleet converged on the Queenship like hunting wolves. Rail guns hurled projectiles at relativistic speeds, while fusion missiles created a wall of nuclear fire. The bioship's defenses were incredible, its living armor flowing and adapting to deflect the worst of the damage, but there was simply too much firepower concentrated against it. Slowly, inevitably, the Queenship began to die. Its surface cracked and bled, its weapon organisms fell silent, and its attempts to repair itself grew weaker with each passing minute. But even as it died, it continued to birth new bioships, launching them from hidden chambers in its hull in a final, desperate attempt to save its species. Captain watched from the Retribution's bridge as the last of the spawning platforms exploded. Around her, the crew worked with quiet efficiency, targeting any bioship that tried to escape the nebula. There would be no survivors today. There could be no survivors. "Captain," called out Lieutenant, "long-range sensors are detecting bioships trying to flee toward the outer system. Should we pursue?" His voice was ice cold. "No survivors, hunt them down." The battle lasted 18 hours. When it ended, The nebula was empty except for debris and radiation. The species that had dominated this region of space for over 3 centuries no longer existed. Every bioship had been destroyed, every spawning facility reduced to atoms, every trace of their civilization erased from the galaxy. Stood alone on the observation deck, staring out at the glowing remnants of what had been a living nebula just hours before. The silence was absolute. For the first time in living memory, this region of space was truly at peace. Admiral found her there as the human fleet began its journey home. The old soldier looked tired, aged by what he had been forced to do. "It's over," he said simply. Nodded, "Yes, they're all gone." "I know what you're thinking," continued. "We're monsters. We committed genocide. We wiped out an entire species without trial or mercy." The alien priestess was quiet for a long moment. "No," she said finally. "You did what needed to be done, what we could not do ourselves. You saved not just my people, but every species that would have encountered in the centuries to come." Looked surprised. "You don't condemn us." Turned to face him, her silver eyes reflecting the glow of distant stars. "Admiral, we prayed to the gods for salvation. We expected beings of light to descend from heaven and save us with divine wisdom. Instead, we got you." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You are not gods. You are something else entirely. You are willing to do evil so that good may survive. You will damn your own souls to save strangers. You are not the heroes of this story, Admiral. You are something far more valuable." "What's that?" asked. Smiled sadly. "You are the monsters that keep other monsters in check, the demons who fight so that others may live in the light, the necessary evil that makes good possible." As the human fleet departed the dead nebula, leaving behind only silence and ashes, understood at last what her people's prayers had summoned. Not saviors but guardians, not gods, but something infinitely more reliable. Humanity had answered their call not because they were commanded by prophecy or driven by divine mandate, but because they had heard strangers in trouble and decided to help, even knowing the cost, even knowing they would be forever marked by what they had to do. In the end, perhaps that was more terrifying than facing gods. Gods might abandon you if you disappointed them, but humans, once they decided you were worth protecting, would follow you into hell itself. And sometimes, hell was exactly where you needed them to go.